Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 144. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the best-selling and acclaimed Vermont author, Bernie Lambek. Bernie.
Hi, Barney.
How's it going?
Good. To say best-selling and to say acclaimed are both very nice words and exaggerations, but
it's true though. I mean, you're a lawyer. You know, if it's written down someplace, you were. I saw your bio. The word best-selling was in there as a best-selling independent author of 2020 November or something. It was very specific, but it was true to form. So
yeah, best-selling at Bear Pond Books in Montpelier is true.
See? Right. See? All right. So yeah. So technically that all of that, and you are acclaimed as well. So that also is true as well. So you just came out with, back in November, you came out with a sequel book to the first book you came out in 2018. The first book you came out with was Uncivil Liberties.
Uncivil Liberties. Yeah.
And you just came out with it's a sequel. You would call it a sequel?
Yeah.
Yeah, an intent to commit.
Yeah, I mean, so it's some of the same characters. It takes place a few years later in time than the events of the first book.
Right.
And there's the cover of An Intent to Commit. The sort of main protagonist in this book is, her name's Sarah Jacobson, and she's the daughter of the person who might be considered the protagonist of the first book.
Right. And so I got lots of questions about the setting and your writing style and how you produce, but can you kind of give people a bit of a background as well as kind of your history and how you started getting into writing mysteries? Because you are originally a teacher, graduated from Dartmouth, correct? And
Yeah, I graduated from Dartmouth in the 70s, and I did teach elementary school for a few short years and went to law school, and I did a few other things, and then went to law school in 1985, to 1988. And then at that point moved to Montpelier, where I've been practicing law since 1988, based in Montpelier. And so I've been doing that a long time, and it was just about 10 years ago I decided, well, I want to try a novel. And I had no idea what I was doing, and but I wanted to just give it a try, and worked at it for several years. I mean, really many years, sort of off and on, so from about 2011 to 2018, I kind of developed that first novel. And then luckily found Rootstock Publishing, who helped me get it off the ground.
And so when you wrote, so that the first book you wrote, the first book that you put together, which was, as we said, it was the Uncivil Liberties. What's interesting about your books is that your books seem to kind of take on a as you say, a First Amendment. It's kind of like a books that kind of focus on First Amendment issues. And as you said, that Uncivil Liberties, you started in 2011, got it published around 20, as you said, about 7 years or so. Did the source of what the book was about kind of evolve over time, since it did kind of take 7 years to write?
Well, I mean, sure, the book evolved. I wouldn't say the source did. I mean, it just took me a long time where there would be periods of 6 months or so where I just put it aside and didn't work on it and pick it up again. And you're right, there's a focus on First Amendment law and constitutional theory in both of these books. Uncivil Liberties has to do in part with sort of cyberbullying of a high school student by another student who has some homophobic beliefs, and targets a friend of his, somebody who really is a friend. But the beginning of that book sort of starts with her death, and the question is, how did she die? Why did she die? And it appeared to be connected with the cyberbullying. So there's First Amendment issues around that throughout Uncivil Liberties, as well as some other issues like prayer at town meeting comes into it. An intent to commit, the second book has to do with racial justice organizing and questions about when does a threat become unprotected by the First Amendment? When is language so severe as to be considered not protected by the First Amendment? So that's one of the issues. And another issue has to do with flying the Black Lives Matter flag, which has an issue that's come up for public schools in Vermont. And whether that raises a First Amendment issue for them if they're confronted or presented with petitions from students of a different perspective or persuasion that want to fly their flag. And then, so that's sort of called the public forum doctrine. Do you create a public forum if you fly the flag, the BLM flag, on your flagpole?
Right. No, you're the old adage of write what you know. Do you, how difficult or easy it is for you to transition between putting on your author hat and putting on your lawyer hat when you're trying to write this? Do you feel as though you have to add some narrative in here for the sake of the reader, or some of it do you feel you have to take away for the sake of over explanation, or how does that work for you?
Well, for sure, to make it a novel that people might want to read, there has to be characters and plot and character development. And that's the part that was new for me and hard. How to make characters come alive and breathe is really the hard thing, I think, for a novelist, and I think was challenging for me. And that's what I was trying to do. It's not just a legal brief, so, but it's mixed between the both of these are mysteries. I call them legal mysteries. And so it's mixed between the mystery plot that's inhabited by these characters, and then, the legal issues that they confront. And I do indeed spend quite a few pages dealing with legal argument before courts and among lawyers and clients, trying to figure out these constitutional issues that have interested me so much in my career. So there's a real deep connection between the kind of legal work I've done over many years now and the issues that I cover in these books.
Right. No, so I'm really curious about it because, as a lawyer, you do a lot of reading, not just, crime thriller novels, but just a lot of reading. Do you ever read any case study or deposition or something along those lines of oh, this would make a great, do you feel yourself, you have to put up some walls, or do you kind of catch yourself with a notepad next to you, let me just put this down as some sort of story seed for another book? Or how does that work for you?
Yeah. I mean, close to that. Not quite a notepad when I'm reading a deposition, but I do draw from my work and from cases I know about, and in fact, I mean, the first book dealt in part with, as I said, prayer at town meeting, and whether towns having their town meeting can constitutionally begin their town meeting with a Christian prayer, and sort of do that. And I had a case of that kind, challenging prayer at a town meeting, that I did with a couple of ACLU attorneys that we brought, and we challenged that. So I mean, I changed some of the facts and, the people involved, but I drew largely from the work I had done.
And do you see that there are some fictional characters, obviously, in this, but it does take place in Montpelier. It does take place in Vermont. Other than the characters, is it a fictionalized Vermont, or is it real Vermont? Is there any other fictionalized things other than characters that you've put into your books?
Yeah, some fictionalized, but I also base it largely on in Montpelier and real places in Montpelier. Sometimes I change the names, sometimes I don't. So a lot of the street names are made up, but anybody that knows Montpelier would kind of know where it is. And I have people getting coffee at a place I call Sacred Grounds Cafe, which is very much Capitol Grounds in Montpelier. And so I use real places, and people will recognize that. I mean, I think that's been a fun thing for some of my readers, Montpelier readers, Central Vermont readers, tell me, that was really it was really enjoyable to kind of locate these places and know what you're referring to.
Right. Now, beta readers, proofreaders, people that come in to kind of read that, are all of them from Vermont, or have you been deliberate to try to find people to kind of help proofread and do some beta reading that are like outside the geographic area?
Well, proofreading itself, I mean, that's a technical thing that was done by somebody hired by Rootstock in each case.
Right.
But I've had readers. I mean, I wouldn't call them proofreaders, but, just looking for it to make sure commas are in the right place and not the wrong place. But with my first book, I sought out a larger group of readers, some, law school friends that lived around the country and so forth, old friends, and a few more. With the second book, I didn't do that. I mean, I had a few readers, critical readers, who gave me, tremendous feedback, and they're recognized in the acknowledgments in both books. So that was really important. That was before it got to the stage of Rootstock pairing me up with a professional editor, who in both cases is somebody called Ricky Gard Diamond, who's a well-known Vermont writer herself, essayist and novelist and short story writer, but she's a terrific editor. And so she gave professional editing to both of these books.
And do you feel it's important, because as you mentioned, you had some of your lawyer friends help do kind of like some beta reading on your first book. Do you find it important for people to read, to kind of like give you feedback, who kind of understand the medium that you're writing in, or having somebody that doesn't understand, say like the law side of things? And then also same thing with like the geographic aspects of it, like having people read that aren't from Vermont to kind of get some feedback on how well is some, like you said, the streets or some of the things described are able to be translated well to someone that might not be familiar with the geography.
Yeah, great questions that I really didn't think about ahead of time. Now that you're asking them, probably should have done more of that. Yeah, I mean, some of the readers were not lawyers, and so didn't have that kind of legal expertise, but mostly more of them were, with the first book anyway. One of my readers, who really helped me a tremendous amount, is a novelist called Howard Norman, who's a highly acclaimed, really, and the word acclaimed there really does work for him, nationally acclaimed. And he happens to be a friend, and he helped me a great deal. With some ideas, he read early drafts in both cases and straightened me out on some things. Yeah, you'll see a blurb by him. You pulled that right up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know of Howard Norman's work at all?
Yeah. He's the author of My Darling Detective and the Bird Artist.
Yeah.
I just read that on that thing there too. So
okay. Yeah, you're so knowledgeable.
Do you see also is like you're writing in, like, comparing it to, like, say, To Kill a Mockingbird or some of these other books, in the sense that how timeless do you see these stories that you're telling? Could you tell them that are based off of some specific slices of Vermont politics as it happens, but do you see some of the messaging and some of the messaging, the morals, and the journeys feel timeless to the readers?
Yeah, it's that mixture of topical things. I mean, cyberbullying in schools, for example, but
Right.
But bullying has always been there, and the tension about what kind of speech should be protected as a matter of constitutional law, but also as a matter of morality. What do we tolerate? What don't we tolerate? I mean, those are timeless questions. And Intent to Commit is also a love story. That's part of the reference in the title. there. And so, there's timeless issues about relationships and people struggling.
Do you see so when you after you finished writing Uncivil Liberties, did you already, because it's interesting, you went from 20, it took you 7 years to write your first book, but it only took you like 2 or 3 years to write your second book. And after you finished Uncivil Liberties, did you say, was it destined for a sequel, or did you have a spark of inspiration afterwards and said, I got another book coming, I gotta write
It took a little while to get there. So no, it wasn't destined. I didn't feel that right from the beginning, but
right.
It didn't take long to, I kept thinking about the characters and wanted to develop these characters further. And I had some other legal issues that struck me as interesting to build a mystery around. The focus of the mystery is a kidnapping in the second book. The principal character is kidnapped right at the beginning, and then there's backstory that fills in how that arises. So no, it took me a little while, but you're right that it didn't take me nearly as long to write the second book, and part of that's a matter of confidence developing. I felt like, oh, okay, I can't do this, which I didn't know, earlier, and was quite doubtful about whether I'd ever really accomplish completing a publishable novel. But when I did, I felt like I can do it again, and I feel like the writing's better in the second book, and it's a better book.
Yeah. Is there any plans on, are you already working on a third one?
I have written some pages that could end up in a third book. It's far from being the case. So I can't, barely. I've done some writing about the characters, continuing the development of their lives, but I don't really have a plot yet.
Right.
So it's more that I've written some scenes.
Right. So, but it is going to still follow some of the same setting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. We'll see. It may never get there, but I hope so.
So talk to us about how you're able to kind of compartmentalize, or how do you split up your day? For instance, if, we have, some listeners or viewers who are like, hey, Bernie, this is great. You get 2 books down, your work, you've set your pace. What would be some advice that you would give to some budding authors or some people who are looking to write their own thing, but they just don't seem to have enough hours in the day to figure out a time to do that?
Yeah, exactly. That's true for a lot of people. I don't have particular discipline about saying, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. and write for 3 hours. I don't do that. I kind of just have written when I wanted to. What's worked for me is my kids grew up, and many years ago now, they're in their 30s, and I have 3 kids, and I've been a lawyer for a lot of years, so I've been sort of being a lawyer more or less, more like half time, not really feeling the pressure to be working, solid 8 to 10 hour days at the law. I don't do that, and so I've had the luxury of time, of my own time, and directing my own time. Also, as a partner in a law firm, I don't have a boss. Of course, cases arise that become pressing and occupy my time, and occasionally I've done trial work. And if you're in the midst of a trial, it's consuming. But especially in the last few years, I've been more or less the master of my time, and had the ability to make time as I wanted. I acknowledge there's a lot of privilege and a lot of luxury in that not everybody has.
Right. So talking a bit again about your source material, Vermont Inside, looking about First Amendment things. What do you find about what are the things that kind of strike you as an author, not necessarily as a lawyer, but as an author, that you find inspiration in writing about First Amendment issues?
Well, I just do find a lot of these issues really interesting, and the debates about them really interesting. I mean, it's going on all the time with the Supreme Court cases, and the development of the law in this area. The development of the law, especially around religious issues, is just changing dramatically with the rightward drift of the U.S. Supreme Court. So, for me, it's fascinating. And what I wanted to do was to bring some of this thinking and argument to a lay audience that might be interested in a mystery and want to read a mystery,
Right.
But also then be exposed to the First Amendment issues and theory.
So there's a bit of, would you say there's a bit of education? Because, you were a teacher too. So are you kind of combining like your first part of your career as an educator with the lawyer piece, kind of combining those with having people learn something from your books as well?
Yeah, for sure. And I tried to deal with the law and the way lawyers work in a realistic way. I mean, that really is a goal. Everybody, not everybody, a lot of people have, their exposure to law, seeing Law and Order on TV or something like that. So they're used to police dramas and criminal law dramas where everything's packed into 60-minute episodes and things happen very quickly, but and it's not always realistic,
Right.
So I've tried to present these things quite realistically. And so, yeah, education's a big part of it. And people have told me that. People have said, I mean, one question for me was, would people be able to get into the legal stuff? And I've had a number of readers say, what I really loved was this legal part, and I learned a lot about the law. It's really interesting. I mean, there's other people who probably don't share their views with me for whom that's not true. And they may really struggled through the legal parts, the legal arguments that are in the books, and maybe just skim those pages and move on more to the plot and the characters.
Right. And so, and I remember you said in a previous interview that the character from the first book was more kind of loosely based off of your personality, but with the second book, not so much.
Right. So this character in the first book, a lawyer named Sam Jacobson. Yeah, I mean, very, very, very loosely. There was a little bit of autobiography in that, and I say very loosely, and that's kind of the way it began when I was writing. And then, as I wrote, and it went through drafts and development, I mean, I realized, look, these characters have to separate from me and my family, and they have to, they have to live their own lives and develop their own characters and personalities. So it moved away from that. So yeah, in the second book, that character, Sam Jacobson, is a relatively minor character in it.
So yeah, so that was kind of that was an explicit thing, or is that some feedback that you get from other people who say, "Hey, let's make it a new character in the second book"?
No, it's just that I wanted to focus on his daughter and her partner, who is a character in the first book. Right. The main character of the first book, it becomes the lover, the partner of Sarah Jacobson. And they're the two chief characters of the second book. And I was just more interested in writing about them and having the younger characters sort of take the lead in that book. It didn't come from other people, really. That was me.
No, so how much did you have to, when you had people edit, kind of like beta read your book and give you a thing, was there anything in there that you really liked? Like, I love this scene, or I like where this is going, that overall they all said, I would cut that out. It's either it's too dry, too slow, or too fast, or too thing. Was there anything on there that you kind of had to pull out of your manuscript and say, well, I'm going to save it for something else. I'll try to find something else for it.
Nothing large, no large section of text was pulled out. I mean, I know this happens with writers a lot. They might write a whole 50 pages that then gets really tossed aside. That didn't happen. It was more, when my editor might have said a certain passage, she didn't know what the rationale for including that was, or something like that, and I had to rethink things. And I never fundamentally disagreed with any of the criticism that I got. Early critiques of the book caused me to restructure it some, so to move scenes from where move scenes around and have two timelines developing at once, rather than do the whole thing chronologically. That came from some critical reading. So yeah.
And so were you always wanting to write like a crime mystery, or did it start off as did Uncivil Liberties always have that genre, or did that evolve into it?
No, it was a mystery from the start. I mean,
Okay.
I was beginning to shake my head when you were asking, did I always want? And so all this stuff only happened when, I'm in my, in my mid 50s when I started doing this. So it wasn't like I was doing any of this before, but it was a mystery from the start. And that's kind of a form. I mean, I've always loved reading mysteries. I read a lot of mysteries, and that's kind of been a genre that I'm comfortable with.
Right.
And I know readers often like mysteries. So, I wanted to write something people would be interested in.
So one of the things I've always been curious about this with people who write mysteries. I've never been. I was kind of curious because I've heard a couple versions of this. Your book starts off like your first book starts off with a murder. Your second book starts off with a kidnapping. Do you, as a writer, know how it's going to end, or do you outline everything out, or are you by the seat of your pants going to say, "Let's see where this goes"? What's your style on that?
Yeah, it's a little more the second than the first.
Really?
I mean, there's always some mixture, but I'm not a big outliner, so I don't have. I mean, I shouldn't say I'm not. In my legal work, maybe I'm more of an outliner, but I didn't have a whole understanding of the plot from start to finish.
Oh wow! Okay.
Before writing, I mean, it was more certain themes, and then some of it. I mean, really is this feeling of sort of watching it develop, seeing where the characters are going to go, and it takes on a life of its own to some extent. I mean, there's a fiction in saying that, because they of course don't really have a life of their own, but it can feel that way. And I didn't know how things were going to end in either book until I got there.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Are you one of those authors where your characters surprise you on the decisions they make, or are you in charge?
Well, like I said, it feels like they are making decisions and leading me along a bit. So, I mean, you want your characters to be consistent in their character and be real that way. Since you're showing the book, I want to mention that both of the artwork on both covers is by a painter called Susan Bull Riley.
Okay.
She's a Central Vermont painter, a really, really good painter. Mostly she does more nature painting, natural scenes, including close-ups and also landscapes. But I took a couple of urban type landscapes that she did. Urbanscapes maybe is the word, I don't know. But she let me use these paintings of hers. And both of them are along the North Branch of the Winooski River in Montpelier.
Are these Montpelier settings then?
Yeah, they're actually from the same spot on there's a little courtyard or a little green space between some apartment buildings on Elm Street looking across the North Branch. It's the same spot, two different paintings.
Really?
And I just love these paintings, so I wanted to use them, and she allowed me to do that.
Okay.
Susan Bull Riley is her name. Susan
Bull Riley. Okay. We'll put a link in there in the show notes for her.
Her website is available. You can find it, and it's got lovely stuff.
So what is it about And also the thing is like, so the theme itself and all this stuff is like when you're working in, like crime thriller, it just seems apropos to actually be in Vermont, but actually make it a winter setting. There's something about crime thriller if it's like, say it's a summer day, it just really doesn't really kind of fit to the theme of the book.
Yeah, that's a bit coincidental there that the painting is a winter setting. I just like the painting. It's not as if the book primarily takes place in winter. Right. So I know what you mean about that might be, you would think that a Vermont mystery is going to be in a really cold environment, but weather does not figure prominently in these books.
Right. Do you, and so what's one of the things that you notice? Because is that kind of a standard fare to kind of begin a mystery, like a mystery thriller with like a crime, like right out the bat? Because then is that something that you've seen as a good way to kind of get your writers, get your readers right involved in the story right from page one?
Yeah, I think it's a plot device to capture the reader's attention, right? I don't know how standard it is. Maybe it's common, I suppose so.
Right. Yeah. That's one of the benefits. And I find it fascinating that, when you set it up, you're along for the ride. That must be exciting for you at writing it, because you basically you're the first one witnessing the story unfold.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that I write that scene first.
Right. Okay. All right.
Because that's some of the restructuring, the reorganizing of the scenes. So in Intent to Commit, which begins with the kidnapping, as I said, and as you know, I didn't write that scene first.
Okay. All right. And was that something that your editor kind of gave you feedback on as to?
It was an earlier reader that made that point to me, right, that you might think about developing this, sort of two timelines in the story rather than do the whole thing chronologically. Okay. Jump back and forth, as long as you can make it clear what's going on.
Right. And so talk to us a bit about also, I'm just kind of curious about how you have time to read. You kind of do you say you get your manuscript? Let's talk to us about Intent to Commit for a second. So you get your manuscript, you wrote everything up. Do you then like print it out, grab a thing, and kind of like sit down and kind of like reread it with a pen mark, or do you just it's all done, you just like email it off to some friends to say, hey, check it out, to give me some feedback on it? What's the next step after you write your first draft?
Yeah, for me, there's no such thing as a first draft. So I'm constantly rewriting as I go along. As I write subsequent chapters, I'm revising earlier chapters, restructuring, as I said. So there's no, this is the first draft. It doesn't really even work that way. It's always a work in process. Okay. Really, right to the very end, it's a work in process. And it may be that I share that work in process with someone at a certain moment in time. Of course I do. Right. That, and so that's a draft at that point, but it's far from a first draft because it's always been undergoing revision the whole time. Every sentence is right. Like that.
And so at what point, as they say, like, perfect is the enemy of good. Is there a point where you're like, I can keep working on this, but I want to share it with somebody first? So is there a point where you have to have the discipline for yourself to say, all right, I gotta stop?
Yeah. I came to points, especially I'm thinking of the first book where I didn't know what more to do, and I needed somebody to read it to get. So, and then that's like a huge act of maybe courage and maybe hubris to want to share it with somebody. And I look back and I think about some of those, early drafts, early versions that I shared with people, and they're, it really wasn't very good. And it's embarrassing in hindsight, but I needed to get feedback from some family members and some friends, and then could keep working on it.
So what would be your tip? So what do you see as kind of like the biggest drawback that you would presume for like people who have their books in perpetual draft form, who just either, is it fear? What do you see? Like if someone say, I'm just afraid to actually take that plunge, or if you have some authors who are like, I'm just afraid it's not good enough yet. What would be your advice for some of those writers who say how to get from that step to the next?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, some people are in writers' workshops and they work with a group of other writers. And then of course that's helpful. I never did that, but that often works for people. I mean, what I would say is, try to get somebody to read some chapters, maybe some portion of it, even if not the whole thing, and give some feedback. And it should probably ideally shouldn't be somebody you're really close to. It shouldn't be, your mother or your kid, although kids are more critical than anybody. So it should be your kid. But, you want to get that honest feedback, as difficult as it is to maybe face that and to take that plunge. But if you're serious about writing and serious about moving it towards publication, I think that's what people ought to do.
Right. And at that, what point should they have, working with rootstock, to kind of try to get your money, get your money's worth on it? Is how many proofreads or having some readers look at it ahead of time before you send it off to an editor?
Yeah, a good question. Probably, I mean, if it's a first book, I would say several readers would be better before you're sending it to a publisher or an agent, if you happen to know an agent and you're going that route.
Right.
Because it's got to be in some decent shape before you get it to a publisher, or they're not going to be interested in it. Right. And I don't mean just, a well-told story, but also in decent shape with grammar and sentence structure and those kind of more prosaic things as well.
Yeah. So do you see yourself also as like, as an author that, kind of filling this specific, because in a way it's like you do fill this niche of because the crime, crime thriller mysteries are all the rage now. Being able to kind of give a voice, do you see yourself providing that voice for, say, Vermont in this type of genre, or do you see yourself providing a voice for First Amendment issues in this type of genre?
Well, probably more the second than the first, because that's a more unusual thing. There are other Vermont writers, mystery writers, better known than me and more accomplished. Vermont's important in these books, but I don't think it's critical. Again, for people that know Central Vermont and Montpelier, there's a lot of stuff that's familiar in it, but it's probably not essential to the books.
Right. Oh, so talk to us about, because you did mention where you got the cover design from. So when you were working with rootstock, soup to nuts, how much did you have, say, for like cover design and all that kind of stuff?
Well, so my initiative to use these paintings, the design, they worked with a professional designer who came up with both interior design and cover design. And I remember for the first book, Uncivil Liberties, they did several designs of the cover using that painting, but in different formats. Like, you'll see the format for Intent to Commit is the paintings on the full page, and Uncivil Liberties. So there's these different ways to do those things. So they gave me a few designs of this Uncivil Liberties cover with the lettering, uncivil being white, liberties being in that color. And there were like, maybe 6 designs, and I was with maybe, a team of maybe 3 or 4 people from the publisher and me. And I remember saying, well, I really like this one the most, I think.
Hmm.
And they all sort of very subtly shook their heads. And I said, well, maybe I like this one. So, they knew more than I did about what would work and what wouldn't work. And, their wisdom prevailed.
Right.
But I worked with them, and it was, maybe, I don't know if it would have been if I'd really chosen something that they thought was the worst cover, they might have just really overruled me, but it never quite got to that point of conflict.
Right.
I should say working with Rootstock Publishing has been terrific. Working with the designer, whose name is Donnie Hoffman, Daniela or Donnie Hoffman. She's great. So I couldn't have been really happier, couldn't have been happier with my editor, with the publisher. It's a great team.
Did you ever, because when you wrote Uncivil Liberties, you never intended it to have a sequel? Are you still, if there's ever a reprint, are you ever going to put, like book 1, book 2 of like, the
trilogy, the Montpelier trilogy?
The Montpelier trilogy, the Lambek Chronicles or something? Or?
Yeah. Well, it's not, again, these books they're printed on demand. So I don't know what it would take to sort of change the cover a little bit or something. So, I don't have any plans for that, for a new cover that would say part 2 of the Lambek Chronicles. I don't see that happening, but.
But you do, as I said, but there's a few themes you're probably going to want to keep though, right? For if and when you write a 3rd book.
Well, yes, I want to keep writing about some of these people. Yeah. So they've developed a life for me that I'm still interested in their characters and want them to have more engagement with the world and with the audience.
And what about, for instance, also like even the cover design is going to be basically kind of the same, like a Susan Bull Riley. Is there another painting you've already kind of picked out?
No, I haven't picked out another one, but there are plenty I could pick out. And, I imagine I would probably ask her again, since now there's a certain theme to that and people will recognize that fact. So that would be likely. I can't say for sure now, but.
Right. But yeah, she does have amazing stuff. Like you say, her landscape pieces are I think what she's more well known for.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So what would you say is like one of the things other than the courage of being able to the confidence of writing again? What were some of the things that you learned on your that you implemented in your 2nd book that you learned from your 1st book?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I was just more confident with the writing. So, there's a little less sweat about, is this good enough? And I didn't feel quite so much like I needed to prove myself. I think I was trying out a lot of things in the 1st book,
right?
Playing with language a little more rather than just writing the story, kind of playing with language, using humor in a certain way. Right. The 2nd book's a little more serious, a little less. The 1st book is sort of a mixture of, I'd say, a little more comedy in it. Okay. Light. Some scenes that are light and have the characters being light with each other. The right. 2nd book's a little heavier.
Now, do you feel did you kind of get some inspiration when you're writing both books? Did you just kind of surround yourself with like, crime, mystery, thriller books, or did you kind of like do multiple genres and just kind of like pulled inspiration from wherever it kind of floated into?
Yeah, I wasn't particularly reading mysteries at the time I was writing any more than any other books. I read a lot of different books, not nonfiction and fiction, both. And no, I wasn't. I do find myself influenced by the writers. So I told you I've written some scenes for a possible third book, and I had been reading over the summer these books by the Italian writer called Elena Ferrante, called the Neapolitan novels. It starts with a book called My Brilliant Friend, and they've become sort of an international phenomenon. And I think they're terrific novels, really exceptional. And I found myself being influenced by that style of writing, which is first-person narrative and very introspective kind of writing about relationships. And it helped me focus that way a little bit more in writing these scenes involving, again, a couple of the same characters.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So you're with these characters for the long haul then. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah, for good or for bad. Yeah.
So Bernie, we are knocking at our hour mark. So so if people are interested in wanting to kind of like follow you and learn more about your work, so the best place that they could probably go would off the bat would probably be BernieLambek.com, correct?
Yeah, that's my website. Bernie Lambek is one word.com will get you there. And I guess this right, you're showing my website. I have a Facebook page for my sort of author persona as well. I'm trying to remember. I think it's still called Uncivil Liberties, that Facebook page, but that's probably something that should be changed because it was a Facebook page begun sort of for my first book.
There it is. No, it's Bernie Lambek.
Okay, so that did get changed. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for finding that so quickly and help that way we can be accurate about it because I'm not accurate in the telling of it. So yeah, so that's a Facebook page, my author page that you'll see.
All right, Bernie. Well, thanks a lot, and come back on when book 3 comes out.
Thank you, Barney. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Take care.
Just gonna hit the book here. So yeah,
I'm very, very grateful for you inviting me to do this with you. And I thought when I saw your website and Storycomic and thinking, okay, this is a guy that really is interested in graphic novels and comics and so on. And I didn't know why you wanted to talk to me, but I'm very glad you did. And you've been a tremendously gracious host. So thank you.
You're welcome. And